When my sister and I left the orphanage, all we inherited was a rusted key and a hatch in the ground. What we found there would change not just our lives, but the story of our entire family. If you've ever felt lost, or like the system was built to keep you down, then maybe this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button and join us, because we're going to talk about what it means to find a home when you have nothing. The day I turned 18 wasn't marked by a party or a new car. It was marked by a manila envelope and the signature of a social worker I'd known for 6 years. Ms. Evans slid it across the laminated table in her office, the same office where I'd been told my grandmother was gone, the same office where my sister, Maya, had her panic attacks assessed on a scale of 1 to 10. The air in that room was always the same, a mix of stale coffee, cheap air freshener, and the quiet hum of institutional despair. "Leo, this is it," she said, her voice attempting a warmth that the fluorescent lights overhead bleached away. "You're officially an adult." It didn't feel official. It felt like being pushed off a cliff in slow motion. Beside me, Maya, who was 2 years younger and 1,000 times more fragile, gripped my hand. Her knuckles were white. For the last 2 years, my 18th birthday had been this looming date on the calendar, a finish line that promised freedom. But standing at that line, all I felt was the vast, terrifying emptiness on the other side. Freedom looked a lot like being homeless. Ms. Evans tapped the envelope. "Your grandmother, Elena, left you something. It's not much, I'm afraid. The state had to liquidate most of her assets to cover debts and, well, the costs of your care." Costs. That's what we were. A line item on a budget sheet. 2 entries in a column of debits. "There's a small parcel of land," she continued, her eyes avoiding mine, "out in Clary County, less than an acre. It's undeveloped. According to the paperwork, it's yours now, free and clear." She pushed a small, rusted iron key across the table. It was heavy, old-fashioned, the kind you see in fairy tales. "This was with the deed. We don't know what it's for." I stared at the key. It was the only physical thing I had from my grandmother, other than a faded photograph I kept tucked in my wallet. In it, she's holding me as a baby, her smile tired but real. Maya was just a bump under her worn-out sweater. "An acre of what?" I asked. My voice sounded hollow. "Just land, Leo. Dirt. Trees. The assessment says it's not suitable for farming. No utilities. The property taxes are paid up for the year, but after that, it's on you." She gave a small, apologetic shrug. "There's a final stipend check in there for you. It should cover a few weeks at a motel, get you on your feet. There are some pamphlets for job assistance programs, too." I didn't reach for the envelope. My hands felt like lead. "On my feet." It was a phrase people like Ms. Evans used a lot. It assumed you had feet to stand on, not just a void beneath you. Maya leaned her head against my shoulder. "What about the house?" she whispered. It was a question she'd been asking for 6 years. Our grandmother's house. The place where the scent of baking bread and lavender soap filled the air. The place with the creaky porch swing and the garden full of stubborn, beautiful weeds she called wildflowers. Ms. Evans's expression tightened. The house was sold. There was a mortgage, honey. There was nothing left. Nothing. That word echoed in the sterile room. Nothing left of the laughter, the bedtime stories, the scraped knees patched with cartoon bandages. Nothing but a patch of dirt and a key to nothing. "There is one other thing noted in the file," Ms. Evans said, almost as an afterthought. She flipped through a thin folder with my name on it. The surveyor's report from years ago mentions a structure on the property, an old storm cellar it looks like, just a hatch in the ground, probably flooded or full of snakes by now. A hatch in the ground. The image was bleak, a dark mouth in the earth. That was our inheritance. A hole. We walked out of the facility an hour later, me carrying a single duffel bag with everything we owned, and Maya clutching the manila envelope like it was a winning lottery ticket. The automatic doors slid shut behind us, cutting off the familiar sounds of shouting kids and ringing phones. For the first time in 6 years, there was no one to tell us when to eat, when to sleep, when to wake up. The silence was deafening. The world outside the gray walls of the Youth Authority Center felt impossibly bright, impossibly loud. Cars rushed by, their drivers sealed in their own little worlds. People on the sidewalk hurried along, their faces set with purpose. They had places to go. We had a bus stop and a key to a hole in the ground. We found the cheapest motel we could, a place on the edge of town where the neon sign flickered like a dying heartbeat, and the carpets were a map of old stains. The room smelled of cigarette smoke and bleach. Maya immediately curled up on one of the beds, pulling the thin, scratchy blanket over her head. She didn't cry. She just disappeared. I sat on the edge of the other bed and finally opened the envelope. Inside was the check, just as Ms. Evans had said. It was for $2,000. Enough to feel like a fortune, but not enough to last. Beneath it was the deed, a crisp document full of legal language I didn't understand. And at the bottom, stapled to a list of job centers, was a folded, yellowed piece of paper. It was a hand-drawn map. The lines were faint, sketched in pencil. It showed a winding road, a creek, and a small square marked with an X. Next to the X, in my grandmother's familiar, spidery handwriting, were 3 words. Start here, my birds. My birds. That's what she called us. I traced the words with my finger, the first real connection to her I'd felt in years. It wasn't a demand, it was an invitation. I looked over at Maya, a lump under the blanket. I looked at the peeling paint on the motel room walls, at the water-stained ceiling. We could stay here. We could try to find jobs, an apartment. We could try to build a life out of the $2,000 and the pamphlets full of empty promises. Or we could follow the map. We could go to the acre of dirt and the hatch in the ground. It was a choice between a predictable, grinding failure and an unknown, terrifying possibility. I didn't know what we would find, but for the first time since walking out of that office, a flicker of something other than fear sparked inside me. It felt a little like hope. That night, I dreamed of the hatch. It was in the middle of a dark, silent forest. It wasn't iron or wood, but made of old, worn stone. And from the keyhole, a tiny sliver of warm, golden light was escaping, cutting a path through the darkness. The bus ride to Clary County was a journey backward in time. The city's gleaming towers and 6-lane highways slowly gave way to strip malls, then to 2-lane roads flanked by endless fields of brown, dormant cornstalks. The bus groaned and rattled, its passengers a quiet collection of tired-looking people, each lost in their own thoughts. Maya sat with her forehead pressed against the cold glass of the window, watching the world blur by. She hadn't said much since we left the motel. Her silence was a heavy blanket I didn't know how to lift. I had the deed and the map spread across my lap, trying to make sense of them. The deed was for Lot 7, Block 4, of the old Miller Tract, a name that meant nothing to me. The map was more personal, more real. The road was called Sparrow Creek Road. The creek was, unsurprisingly, Sparrow Creek. It felt like a sign, a breadcrumb left just for us. Late in the afternoon, the bus driver called out, "Sparrow Creek Road," his voice startling me from a half-sleep. We were the only ones to get off. The bus pulled away with a hiss of its air brakes, leaving us standing in a cloud of diesel fumes on the side of a deserted country road. There was no town, no station, not even a bench. Just a rusty green signpost and a gravel road disappearing into a thicket of pine trees. The air was different here. It was clean and cold, smelling of damp earth and pine needles. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rustle of the wind in the trees. It was a world away from the constant noise of the city, the constant hum of the institution. It was terrifying and beautiful all at once. "Leo, where are we?" Maya's voice was small. She hugged her thin jacket tighter around herself, her eyes wide as she scanned the dense woods that pressed in on either side of the road. "We're here," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I pulled out the map. The property should be about a mile down this road, on the left, just past the creek. We started walking. Our duffel bags were heavy, and the gravel crunched loudly under our sneakers. Every snap of a twig in the woods made Maya jump. I kept my arm around her, a gesture that was supposed to be comforting, but probably felt as flimsy as it was. Part of me was screaming that this was a mistake. We had burned through a chunk of our money on the bus tickets. We were in the middle of nowhere, with no food, no water, and no plan beyond finding a hole in the ground. The logical part of my brain, the part that had learned to survive in the system, told me to turn back, hitch a ride to the nearest town, and find a job washing dishes. But another part of me, the part that still remembered my grandmother's voice, kept walking. We crossed a small, rickety wooden bridge over a shallow, fast-moving creek. The water was so clear you could see the smooth, gray stones on the bottom. Sparrow Creek. According to the map, we were close. And then we saw it. A break in the trees, marked by a single, dilapidated fence post. The land beyond it was a mess. It was a tangle of overgrown weeds, thorny bushes, and spindly, skeletal trees. It didn't look like an inheritance. It looked like a place the world had forgotten. "This is it?" Maya's disappointment was a palpable thing. "It's just weeds." "It's ours," I said, the word feeling strange on my tongue. We pushed our way through the brush. The ground was uneven, soft and spongy in places. 10 minutes of searching revealed nothing but more thorns and rocks. Doubt began to creep in, cold and sharp. Maybe Ms. Evans was right. Maybe it was just a useless piece of dirt. Maybe the surveyor's note was a mistake. "Leo, I'm cold," Maya said, her teeth chattering. The sun was beginning to dip below the treetops, and the temperature was dropping fast. We couldn't stay out here. We needed to find shelter or go back to the main road and hope for a ride. I was about to agree, to admit defeat, when my foot caught on something hard. I stumbled, catching myself on a low-hanging branch. I looked down, pushing aside a thick clump of dead leaves and tangled vines. And there it was. Not stone like in my dream, but a square of heavy, rust-pitted iron, about 3 feet by 3 feet, set flush with the ground. In the center was a recessed iron ring for a handle, and next to it, a keyhole, clogged with dirt and rust. The hatch. It was real. A wave of something wild and electric shot through me. It wasn't just a hole. It was a door. "Maya, look!" I shouted, my voice cracking. She scrambled over, her eyes fixing on the iron square. A flicker of her old curiosity, the curiosity I hadn't seen in years, sparked in her face. "Is that it?" "I think so." I knelt down, my knees sinking into the damp earth. I took the heavy key from my pocket. My hand was shaking as I tried to fit it into the keyhole. It wouldn't go. The lock was packed solid with years of dirt and grime. For a moment, panic seized me. To come all this way, to find it, only to be blocked by a bit of rust. It felt like a cruel joke. "Let me try," Maya said. She took a bobby pin from her hair and began to patiently, methodically, pick at the grime in the keyhole. She was always the one with the patience, the focus for small, delicate things. I watched her, her brow furrowed in concentration, her small hands working with a surgeon's precision. After a few minutes, a small clump of dried mud fell out. "Try now," she said. I inserted the key. It slid in halfway, then stuck. I wiggled it, gently at first, then with more force. There was a grating, scraping sound, and then, with a loud, resonant click that seemed to echo through the silent woods, the lock turned. We looked at each other, our breath held. I grabbed the iron ring with both hands and pulled. Nothing. It was impossibly heavy, sealed shut by time and gravity. "Together," I grunted. Maya wrapped her small hands next to mine. "On 3, I said. 1, 2, 3. We pulled, our muscles straining, our feet sliding on the damp ground. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a deep groan of protesting metal, the hatch moved. It lifted an inch, then another. A gust of cold, musty air rushed out, smelling of damp stone, decay, and something else. Something that smelled like time itself. We heaved it all the way open and leaned it back against a tree. We peered into the darkness below. A set of steep, concrete steps led straight down into blackness. It was a throat, swallowing the last of the day's light. "Do we go down?" Maya whispered, her voice trembling. "Grandma wanted us to," I said, though I wasn't sure of anything. "She said to start here." I took the small flashlight from our duffel bag, one of the few practical things I'd thought to buy. I clicked it on. The beam cut a weak yellow circle into the oppressive dark, revealing damp concrete walls, slick with moisture, and the top few steps. It didn't reveal the bottom. I took a deep breath. "Stay here," I told Maya. "I'll go first." "No," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "We go together." She took my hand again, her grip as tight as it had been in Ms. Evans's office. And together, we took the first step down, leaving the world of sunlight and trees behind, and descending into the earth. The air grew colder with each step. The flashlight beam danced over the concrete walls, revealing dark stains and long, spidery cracks. The steps were slick, and I had to hold the rusted iron handrail to keep my balance. There were 12 steps in total. At the bottom, we found ourselves in a small, square room, no bigger than our motel room. The floor and walls were bare concrete. The ceiling was low, so low I could touch it by raising my hand. In one corner, a small metal cot with a rotted mattress sagged against the wall. In another, a few empty, rusted cans lay scattered on the floor. It was a tomb, a cold, empty concrete box. The hope that had carried me all this way began to curdle into bitter disappointment. This was it? A damp, useless hole? We had traded our last dollars for this. "There's nothing here, Leo," Maya said, her voice echoing slightly in the small space. She was right. It was empty. All of it. The map, the key, the journey, had led to a forgotten, empty room. I swept the flashlight beam across the floor one last time, ready to turn and leave, to climb back out and face the failure. And then the light caught it. Tucked away in the darkest corner, almost invisible against the gray concrete, was a box. It wasn't a treasure chest. It was a simple metal footlocker, the kind soldiers use. It was painted olive green, but the paint was flaking, revealing patches of rust underneath. It was locked with a heavy padlock, but there was no key. My heart hammered against my ribs. This had to be it. This was what she had hidden for us. "Maya," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I pointed the flashlight at the footlocker. She moved toward it, her earlier fear replaced by a new intensity. She ran her fingers over the cold metal. "How do we open it?" she asked. We had no tools, no crowbar. The padlock looked thick, unyielding. I felt a surge of that same frustration I'd felt at the keyhole. It was another locked door, another obstacle. I kicked the footlocker, a useless act of anger. The sound boomed in the small chamber. It didn't budge. I sat down heavily on the damp floor, the cold seeping through my jeans. I felt utterly defeated. We were so close. The answer, whatever it was right there, inches away, but locked away from us. Maya didn't give up. She was examining the padlock, turning it over and over in her small hands. Then she started examining the footlocker itself, running her hands along the seams, tapping the sides. She stopped at the back, near the hinges. "Leo, look," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "The hinges, they're just held in with pins." I crawled over. She was right. The two heavy hinges at the back of the lid were held in place by simple, smooth steel pins. They were rusted, but they weren't welded. They were designed to be removed. Using the end of the iron key as a makeshift tool, I started tapping at the bottom of one of the pins. It was stiff, but it moved. A fraction of an inch at a time, I hammered it upwards. It took 10 minutes of patient, rhythmic tapping, my knuckles scraping against the rough metal. But finally, the first pin slid free. We did the same with the second. With the hinge pins removed, the heavy padlock on the front was useless. The entire lid was now loose. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I looked at Maya. Her face, illuminated by the shaky beam of the flashlight, was a mixture of fear and fierce hope. This was the moment. This was the reason we were here. We both placed our hands on the lid. We lifted. It came away easily. I shone the light inside. The first thing I saw was a thick, sealed manila envelope. On the front, in my grandmother's elegant looping script, was a single word: Leo. The sight of my own name, written in her hand, hit me like a physical blow. It was a message from the past, a voice from beyond the grave. My hands trembled as I reached in and lifted it out. It was heavy, thick with papers. Beneath it, I could see other things. More envelopes, stacks of documents tied with string, and something else. Something wrapped in oilcloth. But for now, all I could see was that envelope. With Maya huddled close beside me, her head on my shoulder, in the cold, damp silence of our inheritance, I broke the seal. Inside was not one letter, but many, all written on thin, almost translucent paper. The ink was slightly faded, but the handwriting was clear. I unfolded the first page. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, then you are 18, and you have found your way here. I am so sorry I could not be there to see you become a man. Know that not a day has gone by, not a single one, where I have not thought of you and your sister. I need you to be strong now, stronger than you have ever been. What I am about to tell you will be difficult to hear, but you must hear it. You must understand." I paused, my throat tight. I could almost hear her voice, reading the words aloud. I could smell the lavender soap she always used. I had to stop and take a breath before I could continue reading. The letter was a confession. It was a story. It was the truth. "The story they told you," she wrote, "the one about debts and a mortgage, is a lie. A necessary lie I constructed to protect you. I did not lose the house. I sold it. I sold it and everything else I owned for one reason: to buy this small, worthless piece of land, and to buy time." My mind reeled. She sold the house, our home, the place we had longed for 6 years, for this, for a hole in the ground? Anger, sharp and hot, flared in my chest. It felt like a betrayal. How could she? "Do not hate me yet, my bird," the letter continued, as if she knew what I would be feeling. "You must understand what I was running from, or rather, who I was running from." A few months before I died, I discovered something terrible. The company my husband, your grandfather, worked for his entire life, a company called Northridge Development, was not just building homes. They were poisoning people. The flashlight trembled in my hand. Northridge Development. The name was unfamiliar, but it sounded powerful, permanent. "Your grandfather was a geologist," she wrote. "He surveyed land for them. He was a good man, a trusting man. He believed in the company. But he started getting sick. So did others in the community near their new project, the one out by Black Creek. Cancers, children with birth defects. He started asking questions. He started looking at his old surveys, at the water sample reports they told him to file away and forget. He found that the company had known for years that they were building on top of an old, unrecorded chemical dump site. They knew the toxins were leaching into the groundwater, and they covered it up. They buried the reports. They paid off inspectors. I had to read the paragraph twice. This wasn't just about a house or money. This was something else entirely. This was dark. "Your grandfather confronted them. He told them he was going to the press, to the EPA. 2 weeks later, he had a heart attack on a survey site. A massive, sudden heart attack. He was only 52. The company called it a tragedy. They paid for his funeral. They gave me a generous pension. They told me he was a hero. I knew they were lying. I knew they had killed him." I stopped reading. I looked at Maya. Her face was pale, her eyes huge in the dim light. She had been too young to remember our grandfather. To me, he was a ghost, a smiling face in a handful of old photographs. A man who died of a heart attack. But he hadn't. He had been murdered. The story of our family, the one I had carried in my head for all these years, was beginning to fracture, to crumble away, revealing something terrifying underneath. I took another shaky breath and continued reading my grandmother's words. I found his real files, the ones he kept hidden in his workshop, the original water tests, the internal memos, the proof. I knew what would happen if they found out I had them. I would have an accident, too. And what would happen to you and Maya? They would not hesitate. You were leverage. So I made a choice. I created a story of financial ruin. I sold our home, our life, everything that tied us to that town. I took the money and I disappeared. I bought this piece of land under a different name, a name from my childhood, because it was remote, forgotten, and because it had this old cellar. A place to hide the truth, a place to hide you. My anger from before had vanished, replaced by a cold, heavy wave of grief and awe. She hadn't abandoned us. She hadn't failed us. She had sacrificed everything. She had wrapped us in a lie to keep us safe, placing us in the cold, impersonal arms of the state because it was the only place a powerful corporation couldn't reach us without raising flags. The orphanage hadn't been a punishment. It had been a sanctuary, a prison built to look like a fortress. I planned to wait, the letter went on, to wait until you were both old enough, until I could find a lawyer who couldn't be bought. But the cancer I thought I had beaten came back. It came back fast. I ran out of time. So I am leaving this choice to you, Leo. In this box, you will find two things. You will find your grandfather's evidence, all of it. And you will find the rest of the money from the sale of the house. It's nearly $200,000. I never touched a cent of it. It's yours. My breath caught in my throat. $200,000. It was an impossible number, a sum so large I couldn't even picture it. It was enough to change everything. A new life. College for Maya. A real home. You can take the money, she wrote. Take it and disappear. Run. Build a good life for you and your sister. No one would blame you. I would not blame you. Forget Northridge Development. Forget what they did to your grandfather. Forget this hole in the ground. Or you can use the evidence. You can finish what he started. It will be hard. It will be dangerous. They will fight you. They will try to crush you. But it is the right thing to do. The land they poisoned is still poisoning people. The families there are still suffering. They deserve justice. Your grandfather deserves justice. The letter ended with one final paragraph. I cannot make this choice for you. It must be yours. Whatever you decide, know that I love you. I have always loved you. Be brave, my birds. Your loving grandmother, Elena. I folded the letter, my fingers numb. The silence in the cellar was profound. $200,000. A new life, free and clear. Or a box of proof, and a fight we could never win. My grandmother had not left us an inheritance. She had left us a crossroads. She had left us a choice between a comfortable life and a meaningful one. I looked at the footlocker. Inside it lay our future. Two futures, side by side. One was a neat stack of cash. The other was a pile of yellowing papers that could burn our whole world down. Maya finally broke the silence. "What do we do, Leo?" she asked, her voice small but steady. She wasn't asking about the money. I knew, looking at her determined face, that she was asking how we started the fight. For a long time, I didn't answer. The weight of it all was crushing. I was just a kid, an 18-year-old kid who had spent the last 6 years learning how to be invisible, how to not make waves. The system teaches you that. It teaches you to keep your head down, to not cause trouble, to accept what you're given. And here was my grandmother, reaching out from the grave, asking me to stand up, to shout, to fight a monster. I felt a tremor of fear so profound it made me sick to my stomach. They had killed my grandfather. What would they do to us? We were nothing, 2 orphans with a box of old papers. But then I looked at the letter in my hand. I thought of my grandmother, alone, knowing she was dying, carefully packing this box, writing these letters, creating a plan to give us a choice she never had. She had trusted me. She had trusted that the boy she remembered would grow into a man who would understand. She had trusted me to be brave. Taking the money felt like a betrayal deeper than any I could have imagined before. It would mean that my grandfather's death was meaningless. It would mean that my grandmother's sacrifice was for nothing. It would mean that the kids getting sick out by Black Creek didn't matter. I reached into the footlocker, and my fingers brushed against the oilcloth-wrapped package. I pulled it out. It was heavy, dense. I unwrapped it. It was cash. Stacks and stacks of $100 bills, bound with rubber bands. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was a beautiful, terrible temptation. It was an escape. It was an easy way out. I held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it. Then I placed it carefully back in the box. I reached in again and pulled out a thick file folder tied with string. It was labeled Black Creek Water Samples. "We fight," I said. And in the cold, dark cellar, under the weight of our family's history, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like an orphan. I felt like a son, and a grandson. The decision to fight was one thing. Figuring out how to do it was another entirely. We were two kids in a concrete hole with a box of damning evidence and a fortune in cash. We couldn't just walk into a police station. My grandmother's letter made it clear how deep the company's influence ran. We needed a plan. We needed help. That night, we didn't go back to a motel. We stayed on our land. We pulled the old, rotted mattress from the cot and dragged it outside, laying it on a patch of ground that was mostly free of thorns. We built a small fire. We had no food, but the warmth was enough. We sat there under a vast, star-filled sky, the likes of which I'd never seen in the city, and we talked. For the first time in years, we really talked. Maya, who had been so quiet and withdrawn, was full of questions, full of fire. She wanted to know everything about our grandfather, about our grandmother. I told her the few stories I remembered, painting a picture of them from the faded fragments in my mind. The cellar, which had at first seemed like a tomb, now felt like a sanctuary. It was the heart of our land, the place where our real story was kept. The next morning, we walked the 2 miles into the nearest town, Clary. It wasn't much more than a main street with a handful of storefronts, a dusty grocery store, a diner with a flickering "open" sign, a hardware store, and a small office with a sign that read, "Clary County Legal Aid." It was a long shot, but it was the only shot we had. The office was small, cluttered with stacks of paper and law books. The woman behind the desk looked up, peering at us over her reading glasses. She looked tired, overworked. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone flat. "We need to see a lawyer," I said. "My name is Ms. Albright," she said, not unkindly. "And I have a caseload that could choke a horse. What's this about? Landlord dispute? Unpaid wages?" "It's about a company," I said, my voice lower. "Northridge Development." Her expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a guardedness. "Never heard of them," she said, a little too quickly. "We can't help you." She was lying. I knew it. "Please," Maya said, her voice quiet but firm. "Our grandmother was Elena Rojas. Our grandfather was David Rojas." At the mention of their names, Ms. Albright's composure finally broke. She took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes, a gesture of deep weariness. "Elena's grandchildren," she said, her voice soft. "I'll be damned. She said you might come one day." She stood up and locked the front door of the office, flipping the sign to "closed." "All right, kids," she said, her voice all business now. "Come in the back, and bring your box." We spent the next 4 hours in her cramped back office, the smell of old paper and brewing coffee thick in the air. We laid everything out on her desk, our grandfather's files, the water sample reports, the internal memos detailing the cover-up. We showed her our grandmother's letter. Mrs. Albright, whose first name was Sarah, read everything in silence. She was methodical, her face a mask of concentration. She held certain pages up to the light, her eyes scanning for details we would have missed. The more she read, the deeper the lines on her forehead became. When she was finally done, she leaned back in her chair and was silent for a long time. "Your grandmother was a smart woman," she said at last, "and a brave one. She approached me a few weeks before she passed. She didn't show me all of this, just hinted at it. She was trying to see if I was someone she could trust." "Can we trust you?" Maya asked bluntly. Sarah Albright looked at my sister, and a small, sad smile touched her lips. "My father died of pancreatic cancer 5 years ago," she said quietly. "He worked on the crew that built the foundations for the Black Creek houses. He never smoked, barely drank. The doctors called it bad luck. I've always wondered." She tapped the thick file of evidence. "This isn't just your fight. This town has been whispering about Northridge for a decade. People get sick, they move away, or they die, and the company sends a check, calls it a gesture of goodwill. They've been buying the silence of this community for years." "So you'll help us?" I asked, a knot of hope tightening in my chest. "I'll do more than that," she said, her eyes glinting with a lawyer's fire. "I'm going to help you burn them to the ground." She then laid out the reality of our situation. It was going to be a long, brutal fight. Northridge Development was a massive corporation with an army of lawyers. They would try to discredit my grandfather, to paint him as a disgruntled employee. They would try to paint my grandmother as a crazy, vindictive old woman. They would come after us. They would try to prove we were just a pair of greedy orphans looking for a payday. "Which brings me to the money," she said, gesturing to the footlocker. "That $200,000 is both a blessing and a curse. It's the motive they'll use against you. We need to be smart about it." Her plan was simple and brilliant. We wouldn't use the money for ourselves. We would use it to fund the fight. We would open a trust administered by her, dedicated to the Black Creek Justice Fund. We would use it to hire independent environmental experts to conduct new soil and water tests, to pay for discovery fees, to support the other families who would inevitably join the lawsuit. We would turn their potential weapon against them. "But what about you two?" she asked, her tone softening. "You need a place to live. You need to eat." "We have a place," I said, surprising myself. "We have our land." Sarah looked at me, a long, appraising look. "It's not much," she said. "It's ours," I repeated, and I meant it. That acre of weeds was the only thing that was truly ours. It was our anchor. The next few months were a blur of activity. Sarah was a whirlwind, filing motions, contacting other families in the Black Creek area, and preparing the case. We lived on the land. We bought a used, beat-up travel trailer with a small portion of the cash. Sarah insisted it was a necessary expense, and parked it in a clearing. We learned how to live off the grid. We learned how to chop wood, how to haul water from the creek and purify it, how to make a fire last through the cold nights. It was hard. It was exhausting. There were days I was so tired and sore I could barely move. There were days I looked at our meager existence and thought about the $200,000 sitting in that trust, and the easy life it could have bought us. But then I would look at the files spread out on the trailer's small table, at my grandfather's neat, precise handwriting, and the doubt would vanish. We were doing what he couldn't. We were honoring our grandmother's sacrifice. The community, at first wary, began to change. The man at the hardware store, a grim-faced fellow named Mr. Henderson, started giving us discounts on supplies. "For the Rojas kids," he'd grumble, refusing to make eye contact. One day, a truck pulled up our long, unpaved driveway, and a woman I recognized from the diner got out. She handed me a box full of fresh vegetables from her garden and a warm loaf of bread. "Sarah told us what you're doing," she said simply. "It's about time someone did." They were small gestures, but they meant the world. They were threads, weaving us into the fabric of this place we had stumbled into. We were no longer just two orphans on a forgotten piece of land. We were becoming part of a community that was starting to find its voice. The fight with Northridge was just as brutal as Sarah had predicted. Their lawyers descended like vultures. They filed motion after motion to dismiss the case. They sent private investigators to dig up dirt on us, on our family. A slick corporate lawyer tried to offer me a settlement on the side. "$1 million, kid," he'd said, meeting me at the diner. "For you and your sister. All you have to do is turn over the box and walk away. Think about it. You could be anywhere in the world, living any life you want." A year ago, that offer would have been a dream come true. But sitting there, across from that man in his $1,000 suit, all I felt was a cold, clear rage. He wasn't offering me a future. He was trying to buy my grandfather's memory. He was trying to buy my grandmother's sacrifice. He was trying to put a price on the lives of the people in Black Creek. "My grandmother already gave me a choice," I told him, "and I made it. The answer is no." His smile vanished. "You're making a big mistake, kid," he'd said, his voice dropping to a threat. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." But he was wrong. I knew exactly who I was dealing with. And for the first time, they were starting to realize who they were dealing with too. They weren't dealing with two scared kids. They were dealing with Elena and David Rojas's grandchildren. And we weren't for sale. That was a turning point. It was the moment I realized that home isn't just a place with four walls and a roof. It's not something you can buy or sell. Home is a choice. It's a fight. It's the place where you decide to stand your ground. For me and Maya, home was a rusty hatch in the ground, a beat-up trailer, and a promise we intended to keep. It has been 3 years since that day we first opened the hatch. The legal battle is still ongoing. These things take time, Sarah tells us. The wheels of justice grind slow, but they do grind. The new environmental tests confirmed everything my grandfather had discovered. The local news picked up the story, then the state news. Northridge Development stock has plummeted. They are facing federal investigations. More families have joined our lawsuit. We have not won yet, but we are winning. Life on our acre of land has found its own rhythm. I work part-time for Mr. Henderson at the hardware store now. He's still a grump, but sometimes I catch him smiling when he thinks no one is looking. Maya is finishing high school through online classes. She's at the top of her class. She wants to be an environmental lawyer like Sarah. She spends her evenings studying water sample reports, her face lit by the glow of her laptop. She is no longer the fragile girl who hid under a blanket. She is a warrior. The land itself has changed. Or maybe we've changed it. We cleared the thorns and the brush. We planted a garden full of stubborn, beautiful vegetables. I built a small porch onto the front of the trailer. On clear nights, we sit out there on 2 mismatched chairs and watch the stars. The same stars my grandmother must have watched. We never touch the money in the trust for ourselves. We live simply. We have what we need. The cellar is still there. We keep it clean now. Sometimes when things get hard, I go down there and just sit in the silence. It's not a tomb anymore. It's a foundation. It's the place our new life was built on. The footlocker is in Sarah's office, but the empty space it left in the corner of the cellar doesn't feel empty. It feels peaceful. Its purpose has been served. A few months ago, Sarah called us into her office. One of Northridge's lawyers had reached out. They were offering a global settlement, a massive one. Enough money to make every family in the lawsuit wealthy. Enough to make us rich beyond our wildest dreams. But there was a catch. The settlement would include a non-disclosure agreement. We would have to agree to seal the records, to never speak of what the company did. They wouldn't have to admit guilt. They could pay their way out of the truth. Sarah laid out the offer, then looked at us. "It's your decision," she said. "You're the ones who started this. You get to decide how it ends." Maya and I didn't even have to discuss it. We looked at each other, and we knew. We had come this far. We had sacrificed and fought, not for money, but for the truth. Accepting that offer would be the final betrayal. It would mean that in the end, they won. They would have successfully bought justice. "No," Maya said, her voice clear and strong. "No deal. We see this through to the end. We want a trial. We want them to stand in a courtroom and admit what they did." Sarah Albright got the biggest, proudest smile I've ever seen on her face. "I was hoping you'd say that," she said. And that's where we are now, on the verge of a trial that will define the future of this town and our family's legacy. It's scary. It's uncertain. But we are not the same people who walked out of that institution 3 years ago. We are not lost anymore. We have a home. We have a purpose. We have each other. My grandmother left us a choice between an easy life and a right one. We chose the harder path, the one that led down into the darkness of that cellar. But it was in that darkness that we found the light. We found our history. We found our strength. We found who we were meant to be. This story isn't over. In many ways, it's just beginning. But it's our story now, and we get to write the ending. And it won't be an ending they can buy. Sometimes people ask me if I'm angry at the system that failed us, angry at the company that tore our family apart, angry at my grandmother for putting such a heavy burden on our shoulders. I used to be, but I'm not anymore. I've come to understand that the world isn't always fair. The systems aren't always just. But that doesn't mean we are powerless. My grandmother taught me that. She taught me that inheritance isn't about what you're given. It's about what you do with it. Our inheritance wasn't a patch of dirt or a box of secrets. It was a chance, a second chance, a chance to reclaim our family's name, to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves, and to build a home, not out of bricks and mortar, but out of love and sacrifice and a stubborn refusal to give up. So, if you've made it this far, thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of this. Maybe this story resonates with you. Maybe you've faced your own impossible choices, your own giants. Maybe you're in the middle of your own fight right now. If you are, I want you to know something. You are not alone. The world can be a dark and scary place, but there is always hope. There is always a choice. And sometimes, the most valuable thing you can inherit is a reason to fight. I read the comments, and I see the stories you all share. Stories of struggle, of resilience, of finding light in the darkest of places. This community we're building here, it's a testament to that strength. So please, if this story moved you, leave a comment below. Tell us about a time you had to choose the harder right over the easier wrong. What did it teach you? Your story matters. And don't forget to subscribe, because we all have stories that need to be told, and we all deserve a place where we can be heard.